Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Monday the 18th of March here in London. I'm Caroline Hepker. Coming up today, a foregone conclusion. Putin secures a fifth term as Russian president and warns that his country's ambitions won't be stopped. Bloomberg learns that Apple is in talks to build Google's Gemini artificial intelligence engine into the iPhone. And we dig into the trade targeting the remains of Sam Bankman-Fried's once vast FTX empire with a 200% payout. Let's start with a roundup of our top stories. Russia's Vladimir Putin has secured a record victory in a presidential election whose outcome was predetermined. With no credible opponent, Putin won close to 90% of the vote to secure a fifth term in the Kremlin. Speaking to supporters in Moscow, he had this message for those who oppose Russia.
It's become clear for everyone. Whoever wants to threaten us or bully us, whoever wants to suppress us, they were not successful in the past and they will not be successful in the future.
Vladimir Putin's words spoken there by a translator. With his troops on the offensive in Ukraine, Bloomberg has been told by multiple sources that an emboldened Putin is preparing for a long confrontation with the West. Responding to the election result, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said no one in the world is safe.
This figure has simply become addicted to power and is doing everything he can to rule forever. There is no evil he will not commit to prolong his personal power.
Zelensky's words also there, spoken by a translator. They come after the French President Emmanuel Macron warned that the European Union would face an existential threat of a Russian invasion unless Putin's forces are defeated in Ukraine. Russian troops have made recent advances as the government in Kyiv has struggled to keep its military supplies up with munitions following delays in aid from US and European allies. Now, Bloomberg understands that Apple is in talks to build Google's Gemini artificial intelligence engine into the iPhone. The news sets the stage for an agreement that would shake up the AI industry. Bloomberg's chief tech correspondent Mark Gurman explains why.
This would be a blockbuster agreement that has the potential to transform this still growing AI industry. Apple has been working on several new AI tools and services for iOS 18, its next iPhone software update. Those are going to be based on Apple's homegrown AI models, but Apple needs a partner for generative AI. That is the AI that all of us have been talking about for months.
Bloomberg's Mark Gurman adds that if a deal between Apple and Google comes to fruition, it would build upon the two companies' search partnership. Alphabet's Google currently pays Apple billions of dollars annually to make its search engine the default option in the Safari web browser on the iPhone and other devices. Now, the Bank of Japan is widely expected to hike interest rates tomorrow after stronger than expected wages outcomes. 90% of central bank watchers now expect authorities to end the negative interest rate with a first interest rate rise in 17 years. The former Bank of Japan Deputy Governor Masazumi Wakatabe says that the change is almost certain.
And what they are going to do is to raise the policy rate, and they are going to end the negative interest rate policy. And I think that they are probably going to raise that to 0 to 0.1%.
Right.
And also they are going to end the sort of new purchase of the ETF and the J-REIT.
That was the former Japanese central banker Masazumi Wakatabe speaking there. Goldman Sachs has added itself to those predicting a BOJ move, writing in a note that no further data is needed to justify the policy change. Alongside rate hikes, the fate of a slew of extraordinary tools, including yield curve control and massive asset purchases, also hangs in the balance. Israel's military is targeting Gaza's main hospital in the deepest incursion into Gaza City in 2 weeks. According to Israeli forces, Al-Shifa Hospital showed signs of terrorist activity, and its troops are now undertaking what they describe as a precise operation at the location. The news comes as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu pushes back on criticism from US Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, who called for an Israeli election. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter has the story.
Netanyahu first says the aid issue to Gaza is complicated because when it does get in, Hamas loots it and uses it for its own gain. And on CNN, he says majority of Israelis support the government anyway.
I think what he said is totally inappropriate. It's inappropriate for to go to a sister democracy and try to replace the elected leadership there. That's something that the Israeli public does on its own, and we're not a banana republic.
Netanyahu also says its forces are trying to be careful, but that the move to remove Hamas will continue. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
The UK's misery index is at its worst level since the last Conservative election defeat. The unemployment and inflation indicator is showing the worst election year levels since 1997. Bloomberg's Tiwa Adebayo reports.
Politics is about emotion, and misery can tell you a lot about Rishi Sunak's election dilemma. The Prime Minister inherited a sudden jump in the index from his predecessor Liz Truss. Now, despite it shrinking and being forecast to drop further, the economic level of deprivation is higher than any Prime Minister since John Major. The question is if holding on until conditions improve will earn forgiveness for the spike in misery. In London, Tiwa Adebayo, Bloomberg Radio.
Well, staying with the UK, asking prices for property are rising actually at the fastest rate in 10 months as sellers rush back to the market. Rightmove says that its data shows the property market is past its bottom. It's a sentiment that was echoed last week by the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. Here's their chief economist, Simon Rubinson.
In terms of where we are in the market, well, I think I would characterise it as a soft landing, certainly as far as pricing is concerned. The peak to trough decline in prices looks in this cycle to have been, very modest indeed by historical comparison, certainly in nominal terms.
Despite Rubinson's optimism, not everyone is so bullish. The government's official forecaster, the Office for Budget Responsibility, expects house prices to fall almost 3% this year, with only a modest recovery in 2025. Now, in a moment, we're going to discuss Putin's tightly controlled election, what it means for Ukraine and for Russia, and also the fallout from the FTX implosion back in 2022 with our crypto blogger Emily Nicole. But first, another story that caught my attention today. What does new productive forces mean? It seems to be the new key Chinese phrase after common prosperity and socialism with Chinese characteristics. Now, it's a phrase that was listed at the top as the top task in the Chinese government's annual statement of priorities, and that was published on the 5th of March. Something of a frenzy since then to figure out what this slogan means. Bloomberg News has a long read on this, an opinion piece trying to decipher it, because it was a phrase that was coined by President Xi Jinping last September. It seems that Beijing is doubling down on the tech transition, maybe because look at evidence like the robotics and manufacturing stocks that seem to rally on speculation that they might benefit from this phrase. But there are lots of other possibilities for what it might mean, this new Chinese phrase, new productive forces. Perhaps we'll find out in the coming months, and you can read about it on the Bloomberg terminal. Now, let's get more then on that Russian presidential election. Bloomberg's EMEA news director, Roslyn Matheson, joins me now. Roslyn, look, it was a foregone conclusion, really, that Putin would win. Maybe not by these numbers, but it's also pretty interesting what he had to say about the win.
Well, that's right. It was quite a defiant speech in the aftermath of the election, obviously feeling pretty good. Looking at these numbers, of course, as you say, it was a foregone conclusion that he was going to win. But what he did need is results showing him winning by an awful lot, and also that there would be significant turnout, that people didn't stay away and decide to protest by not voting in the election. And so for him, having those two numbers that he can talk about, which is the overall win rate for him, but also the turnout across Russia, is certainly something that he is touting. But his speech itself was quite defiant. Again, talking to those messages he's been saying for a while to people inside Russia, the sense that Russia is under siege from the outside. fundamentally under attack from the West, and that he's the only person who can help Russia stand proudly again. Those words that he said, people want to suppress us. They've not succeeded. They won't succeed now. And also talking about major plans that he still has to enact. And the big question is, what do those look like, especially when it comes to possibly further ambitions into Europe beyond Ukraine?
Yeah, how concerned are European countries then about the likelihood of an expansion of Russian aggression?
Well, very concerned, and particularly those who are very close to Russia, those in Eastern Europe, the Baltic states, and so on. They've felt vulnerable for many years to Russia, even before Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine. They'd warned about it, especially after he annexed Crimea in 2014, and this sense of always feeling, uneasy about what Russia may do. And for a long time, that was pretty well dismissed, especially by countries further into Western Europe, so France and others, that sense that they thought that the Eastern Europeans were over egging their level of concern. But now a real sense of what happens in 5 to 10 years when Vladimir Putin's had time to regroup militarily after, the losses he's sustained inside Ukraine. Is it possible that he does try something further?
Yeah, indeed. This is the major concern, isn't it? Ros, thank you so much for your time and being with me this morning. Bloomberg's EMEA News Director, Rosalind Matheson. Now, let's get more then on the Russian presidential election, shall we? With no serious opponents and a harsh crackdown on dissent in the country, Vladimir Putin secured a fifth presidential term with 87% of the vote. So we'll be discussing this key story, of course, a foregone conclusion that Putin would win, but perhaps not by the numbers that we had expected. So that is one of our key stories this morning. We will return to that. But first, do you remember the implosion of FTX in 2022? The founder Sam Bankman-Fried, now facing decades in prison. He's awaiting sentencing this month. But the FTX bankruptcy has been lucrative for some specialised in distressed assets, including a Testor, which is a boutique London firm, one that I hadn't heard about, but Bloomberg's crypto blogger Emily Nicole has been digging into this story and reporting on it, and Emily joins me now. Great to have you on the programme. So why are people then still talking about FTX? I thought it was all, down to the court cases now. It went bankrupt more than 2 years ago.
It's been a particularly difficult bankruptcy for the people in the estate and people who is owed money by FTX to uncover. We've got, a real mix of assets in there that are really making it difficult for the FTX estate to figure out how to pay people back. But also, it's a very difficult claim for customers to try and levy against the estate as well to get their money back. And funds like a Testor have made that where they have a specialism and they can get that money back perhaps at a higher price.
Yeah, I mean, it's been incredibly lucrative, and I suppose that's what has caught people's attention. Why has the bankruptcy been so lucrative, and why is there so much for people to buy up?
Well, at the time that FTX collapsed, I mean, if you think back to November 2022, Bitcoin was nearing its absolute lowest point in recent years of 15,000 or so. And if we think about where Bitcoin is now, we're going above 70,000 quite regularly. So there's been a very large change in what assets are worth in the FTX bankruptcy. So that's one side of it. There are also some VC bets that FTX have made that are much more valuable now. But the reason why the trade itself is so lucrative is because at the time when FTX collapsed, people really wanted their money back. They didn't think that there was much chance they'd get anything out of it. We knew of this $8 billion hole that was in the FTX estate. And so people were willing to sell their claims super cheaply, cents on the dollar. And now it looks like that the FTX estate may pay everybody's money back. So the funds that bought those claims stand making a big windfall.
Wow, that's incredible. I hadn't realised that. This story has many layers. How are they all related?
I tell the layers of the story. So if we think about this particular story that we've written today, we've got a fund in one corner, so that's a Testor. They have bought a claim from who they see as, just a trader who was owed quite a large amount of money from FTX. And then they just want that claim paid out. But what we've been looking at is a court case that Tesla has brought in New York, where they say that claim has not actually been transferred to them yet. They paid something like $58 million for the claim originally. It's now worth 160 million or so, and the lawyers for Tesla say, this person just doesn't want to give us our claim back. That's what they allege. But actually, there's a little bit more to it than that. The person on the other side of the deal is a man named Junho Bang. He is currently under scrutiny in South Korea, where he is charged with fraud against two companies in particular, one of which is a crypto lender that also traded in this world. And so there's two sides of the coin going on here that make this particular trade so interesting.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond. Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts. You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com. Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa device. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.